Last week, I brought an all-new rifle to the channel, and with it, an all-new playstyle that you guys and gals really seem to have enjoyed watching. Seriously, this video blew up very quickly, so thank you all for that, and if you haven't watched it, definitely do so after this one, because it's not the last time you'll be seeing this kind of gameplay from me, I can promise you that. And today I'm going to bring you along for the upgrading process, and show you what exactly I put into the Ares MSR 700 to get it shooting as nice as it was, although short-lived. For those of you who have watched that video, you will know that I recently acquired the Remington Defense MSR 700 made by Ares, a bolt-action sniper rifle with honestly one of the cleanest and most aggressive aesthetics bolt-action rifles have ever known. And beyond that, you'll also know that I got this gun as a boneyarded weapon. For the uneducated, basically meaning that something externally, or in this case of the MSR, something internally wrong that can't be sold as a brand new rifle from an airsoft shop or reseller. So before this bolty ever saw the field, it of course needed a bit of a touch-up. This guide will also work for the Ares MCM rifles as well, so if you have one of those, you can follow along my guide on upgrading here shortly. Upon my initial inspection of this rifle, and courtesy of its previous home, I could immediately locate the source of this sniper's problems and get to work on procuring some upgrade parts. All but a few of them thankfully being VSR-10 compatible, meaning there are plenty of options for about 99% of the parts in this rifle. We'll get to that other 1% later, and it's not as infuriating as the other proprietary bullshit that I've seen gun companies do before. I'm talking to you, A&K. Don't you pretend like you don't know what I mean. In the list of upgrades, I will not be covering the inner barrel, hop-up bucking, nub, or the hop-up chamber itself, so if you are wanting to see me rebuild that entire system, be sure to let me know down in the comment section, as this gun needs some work there anyway after the ending of its first day out on the field, as some of you will know. But in today's video, we are going to be replacing and tuning the entire compression system, effectively the powerhouse of the rifle and the trigger group, the spot where this rifle is notorious for failing most often, and to do so we are going to need to break this gun down to its bare bones. We'll want to pull off all the attachments including the magazine before we get into the disassembly process, as it will make things much smoother for the chassis and handguard being pulled off. Next, we remove the handguard from the chassis and receiver by unscrewing these two screws at the rear of the top rail and these two long screws from the underside of the handguard itself. After that, the handguard will freely come off from the rest of the rifle, as will the rail spacer under the top rail, both of which can be placed off to the side for now, and we can save it for later when we do reassembly. We will then need to remove the barrel and receiver from the chassis simply by unscrewing this screw at the front of the chassis and a long bolt inside the pistol grip. And with the chassis removed, we are left with the framework of our MSR 700. The barrel and loading ramp for BBs are next in our lineup. The feed ramp needing to be removed carefully by loosening 3 Phillips screws, one at the front of the ramp connecting it to the barrel and 2 at the rear where the magazine feeds to it. While the front screw is a very durable steel screw, the 2 in the back are very easy to strip, so be careful if you are following along with me not to overwork your driver and ruin the head of the screws. Once the 3 screws are out, you'll be able to pull the feed ramp off the internals, which will reveal a small spring. Be sure not to lose that spring, as it is what gives the tension to your magazine when loading BBs, and without it, frankly, you'll be SOL, because they don't make replacements of these, so just put that to the side, keep it safe. With the feed ramp off, the barrel is simply held in by these 2 Allen screws here. You will not need to remove them from their places, but simply loosen them until you can easily pull the outer barrel out of place, which is also the home to the other parts that we will not be replacing in this video in particular. And now we have just the core of the MSR itself, the compression system and trigger pack, which is where all of our upgrades will be happening today. In our list of upgrades, we have the trigger sear, the cylinder head, the piston, spring, and spring guide. The first and most tedious being the trigger sear. For this upgrade, we will need to remove the trigger group from the compression system by unscrewing this Phillips head at the rear of the unit and one that is nested underneath the spring guide retaining sear. This screw is very hard to see, but I recommend using a flathead to pry the sear up enough to grip the sear and gently pull it out of place with some pliers. I would also strongly recommend allowing this screw underneath to remain in its original place, even after being fully loosened, unless you get off by smashing your head into a wall. Then, by all means go for it, I guess. Trying to place this screw back precisely into its slot can be quite tricky and is honestly better served by just staying inside the trigger group while we replace the Sear. It is also good to note that this trigger group is specific to the MSR and will not take upgraded ones for the VSR-10 or similar systems, so if you are wanting to upgrade the entire unit and be done with it, you would have to use an MSR version unit, which to my knowledge is only available from Springer Custom Works. Not sponsored, just wanted to share that information for anyone who has an MSR in need of a new trigger group, and honestly something I may do in the future depending on how much use this rifle sees. With the trigger group removed from the rest of the system and the spring guide Sear removed from the unit, we now need to open up the trigger pack to pull out the original 45-degree trigger Sear, which is not only one of 3 proprietary parts as I mentioned earlier, but for anyone who has ever owned or read up on these MSRs from Ares, will also know leaves a lot to be desired when you start tuning and putting more power into this rifle. To do so, we will be replacing it with this 90-degree steel Sear that will give us a much nicer trigger pull and have a far greater durability in the long run. Now that the trigger group is open, by removing the safety and the 2 screws on the right side of the unit, you can split the unit in 2 and see the internal workings. When you separate the 2 sides, you may hear some clicking or some tension being released from the internal springs, so don't worry. Just keep track of all the parts inside and take a picture of them if needed before removing anything so you know exactly where they go for later. As far as we are concerned, the only part we are going to focus on is this Sear and the 2 springs attached to it at the front of the trigger group. Again, take careful note of how the springs on the Sear are aligned together, as they will need to be placed precisely the exact same way you found them on our new 90-degree Sear. When you are confident you have the springs aligned correctly, carefully place the new Sear into its new home with the flat side of the top edge facing inward towards the rear of the trigger group. Getting the Sear in place may take a couple of tries, so be patient with yourself and be sure to take your time while doing so. This is a very important piece of the rifle's components, so do it right slowly rather than rushing and doing it wrong. Something every guy has probably heard from their girlfriend at a very poor time in the darkness of a room. Once you have your Sear and springs in place, simply close up the unit, being careful not to disrupt your hard work inside, and screw down the unit and put it off to the side. Congrats! The hardest part of this rebuild is done, and now it should be fairly easy from here. See, I pulled a fast one on you there, didn't I? By not saying that this was the hard part, making this process far more enjoyable by getting the aggravating part done first, so you can simply glide through the rest. You can thank me after you're done cursing me out for the Sear later. With the first half of our upgrade done, we can set our sights, no pun intended, on our compression system. This includes the cylinder, cylinder head, piston, spring, and spring guide, all of which in this case are going to be removed and upgraded. This portion also brings us to the crux of why this gun was marked as a boneyard item, and my personal theory on what exactly happened to this rifle for it to find a home on this channel in the first place. But I'll save that until after the upgrading process is done for those of you who are simply here to upgrade your own rifles. Now, after removing the trigger unit, I did forget to mention that the cylinder should freely fall out of the metal receiver, making this a very easy upgrade. While we won't need the cylinder or any of its contents from the original compression set at this point, we will need the bolt handle and end cap for our new cylinder. So you can very easily remove them by unscrewing the Allen screw at the back of your bolt and set them aside for the final build. Assembling the compression system is very, very easy, to be honest. Since we have all the new parts for it, once we have our bolt handle and end piece, we can get right to putting all the pieces together. All of these parts do come from Angel Custom. Not sponsored, I just like their internal parts for my other guns that use them, and I ordered their full pro-tuned sniper internal set to try out for the MSR, which I would personally recommend you do as well for any other sniper system. Not necessarily using Angel Custom, but if one company with a good reputation like Angel Custom has a full bundle with everything you need in it, simply bite the bullet and order the full set. It will be much less expensive than ordering the parts individually without sacrificing quality, and it will be guaranteed that they all fit together as they all come in a bundle and will be tested ahead of time when they get to you, which is much better than ordering parts from a bunch of different companies who may have their own individual tolerances and manufacturing processes and could potentially cause some issues in performance later once you have it all assembled. To start assembling our compression system, we will first apply a thin coat of lubrication to the inside of our cylinder. I would recommend using a spare, clean toothbrush, not the one you've been using for the last 10 years or whatever, to apply the coat of lubrication. A trick I can't personally claim I came up with, but in fact, Luna_Nor, or just Luna, one of my mods from Twitch and an avid Airsoft sniper, helped me out with for this video. So, thank you, Luna, for, as always, being a helpful little bean. I appreciate you. For this video, I am testing out my HPA grade lubricant rather than a traditional silicone oil, which I would suggest more often than not. I just wanted to see how the HPA salve would handle in this case, as it doesn't seem to cling on to debris as much as silicone oil does. So it's just a little test for myself. I'll get back to you on the results when I have more conclusive evidence. When you have a nice thin coat of lube, you can then drop in your spring guide and spring, the spring being an SP170 from Angel Custom as I mentioned before. However, before you drop in your piston, be sure to apply a thin coat of lube once again to the rubber seals, and I would even say adding some to the contact points like the white polycarbonate rings on this particular one from AC. This will help not only in keeping the rubber seals nice and bouncy like a good pair of shoulder boulders, but also it will help reduce the amount of friction between your cylinder and the piston's contact rings, making for a smoother, more even bolt pull. Hey guys, Editing Wolf here. I just want to clarify, the piston that we're using today is the Angel Custom one that I got in their Pro Tune Kit, and after the initial testing and the video that came out last week, this is what it looked like, if I remember to put the image up on screen. The little plastic nub at the very front of the cylinder had apparently misaligned just enough to get absolutely obliterated at the front of the cylinder head, which, for all intents and purposes, is a big no-no. So I can't honestly recommend you guys using this piston in any of your snipers because of this. Although, if you do want to use it and you do end up getting this Pro Tune Kit, what is nice is you can unscrew that little plastic button at the front and just use it as a flat-faced Sear if you want to. Fortunately, I don't have the caveat of doing that because the rubber seal at the front got absolutely cut open and mashed when the plastic piece at the front decided to unalive itself. Anyway, the install process is exactly the same, so don't worry. Just know that the piston that I am installing in this video is not the same one that will be in the MSR very much longer. You can then place your piston on top of your spring, and with all the components inside and freshly coated in a nice layer of lube, you can now add a touch of lubricant to the seal or seals, depending on which cylinder head you went with for yourself, and press your cylinder head down onto your piston and then thread it onto your cylinder. I will also strongly recommend that you add a bit of lube to the outside of your cylinder if you would like to reduce the friction between your cylinder and the receiver just a touch more. Just be careful not to overlube it and gunk up your bolt, as this is the part that's exposed to the environment the most, so it's going to get the most dirty and require the most attention. So just be careful on how much you put onto the outside of your cylinder so it doesn't jam up on you. And now all that is left to do is to put our freshly tuned Ares MSR back together with her new parts and a fresh new attitude. But before we can wrap this video up, I still owe you guys and gals the story of how this rifle came to be in the channel's arsenal. And because I am a man of my word and we still have a little bit of time left on this video, let's jump right into it. Ordinarily, when removing the head from your cylinder, the spring inside should have a little bit of tension on it at all times. But on this particular rifle, when I got it, the spring was seemingly too short to press against the cylinder head, and when shaking the cylinder with the spring inside, you could audibly hear the spring slide back and forth inside the housing. That, boys and girls, is what we call a fucky wucky. You don't want any fucky wuckies in your cylinder. Initially, I thought that the spring had somehow been swapped out to an AEG spring, which are notably shorter than a standard sniper spring. I was terribly wrong. You see, children, there's a reason that I personally recommend to never pull the bolt of a sniper rifle such as this unless you intend on firing it relatively soon after that. The reason being that should you not release the spring after pulling it back by pulling the trigger, and you leave it sitting for weeks, months, even worse, years, that spring will slowly compress and be absolutely ruined, making the rifle borderline useless. And that was exactly the case for this poor MSR. You see, in comparison to the new spring that we just put into this bolty boy, this spring is very, very short, and it's been caused by exactly what I was just talking about. Somehow, some way, this MSR's bolt had been pulled, primed, and ready to fire, but the trigger was seemingly never pulled for God knows how long, and it completely ruined the spring. Outside of that, this rifle was pristine when I got it, and this rifle was discontinued over 5 years ago, which, to put it simply, doesn't track, homie. And to be fully transparent, I got this rifle directly from Evike as one of their boneyard guns, which is totally normal. And for those who know, those rifles come with known and often very obvious issues, but at a very heavy discount as compensation for any problems the gun may have. My best guess is that this rifle was a tester or a display piece at one of Evike's many locations, or was simply the victim of a horrible quality check crime, and somebody pulled the bolt and left it primed for far too long until somebody at Evike found it and marked it as a boneyard item, which in turn led this rifle directly to my attention, and by extension all of you, when I pulled the proverbial trigger and bought it for the channel. So to whoever hurt this beautiful MSR 700, know that your cruelty was in fact in vain, and she now lives happy and healthy with the rest of my collection, where she will be loved, cherished, and see many, many more sneaky sniper kills in the near future. And that is the story of how we now have a very rare and very cool sniper rifle that is the MSR 700 from Ares on the channel. Thank you all for watching until the end of this video, and I do hope that for all of my sniper friends out there, this was a helpful one for you in tuning your own MSR or any other rifle that follows the same basic system. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and for all of my US viewers, a grand 4th of July weekend. Party hard, my fellow Americans, just not so hard that texting your ex seems like a good idea. Be sure to come and say hello on Twitch, where I will be streaming the day this video goes out, and check out the link to Wolfden Apparel in the description if you'd like to support what I do here on the channel further. And as always, this has been Wolf, and hope to see you guys next time I hit the field.